So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today we have the privilege to talk to Elana Freeland again. And she's the grand dame of geoengineering and everything that is connected with it. But today will be a very, very different interview. We are going to talk about Rudolf Steiner and Anthroposophy in general, and I think that will be very interesting as well. So, Elana, welcome back.
Yes, thank you so much. And Judith, this is exciting. I rarely get to talk about Steiner, though I am, as you may know, when I'm on interviews, I generally will mention him at least once because I owe him a great deal regarding my own development. To include these 10 plus, and I think it's about 12 years now, that I've been involved in blowing the whistle on the geoengineering and what it really is and what it's really doing to us. So, you know, he's my trailblazer, my trail guide, and I'm so grateful to him. So where do you want me to start?
Just wait a second and then you go ahead. How did that happen that you stumbled on him? Was that like a family thing? Was that something that a relative or a friend introduced to you? How did that happen?
Oh, that's important. I was 22 years old and I was on my way to China to study with an acupuncturist, herbalist of high repute. I had a letter of introduction from my former teacher in macrobiotics and Chinese medicine. I had made an arrangement with a captain of a ship to pick me up in Hawaii, and I would earn my keep across the Pacific to China by cooking for the crew. That was the deal. So I went ahead, they were in dry dock, and I went ahead to Hawaii to travel around and see the islands and wait for them to pick me up. By the time they arrived, I was going in a different direction. At 22, that's how you are. And at that time, I'd been in college and had completed most of it, but not all of it. It was the 60s, and a great deal was going on in America and the world. So one night I was sleeping at a man's house. He was not home. He was out of town, and he had said I could sleep there. This was on Oahu at Kailua Beach. And I looked on his bookshelf for a book to read, and I saw the book The Way of a Child by A.C. Harwood. And I didn't know anything about Steiner or Waldorf or anything, but I knew one thing, that I would be a teacher and a writer. I had known that since I was 5. How some people know these things, I don't know, but I certainly knew that teaching, I wanted to learn more about teaching. So I stayed up all night and read that book. And by dawn, when the beautiful red dawn was coming there in Kailua Beach, I took a long walk, and I remember saying to myself, this is it. This is it. And I thought it meant this is it for learning to be a great teacher. It didn't have much in there about Rudolf Steiner's cosmology, or certainly not the philosophy of freedom, or any of the things that I would in the future be studying. But that was the beginning And then a few years went by before I was able to get to Waldorf teacher training. And that was in 1977. And I went and did the teacher training course in Detroit, Michigan. They had, I chose that place because my mother lived there outside Detroit, and I thought was going to be helpful to me, but turned out she really wasn't. But I did the course and then returned to the Northwest and got involved with a group of people in Seattle in 1980 to start a Waldorf school in Seattle. And that's what we did. So I gave courses on it. I was trained, and so therefore I could speak with some authority. And I've always been pretty good in front of crowds. And so that was the beginning in 1980. That was the first school I became involved with in starting a Waldorf school. I subsequently started 3 others over the next, over a total of 16 years is really how much of my life I poured into Waldorf education so that children would have a decent childhood and without computers in the kindergarten, without forcing on them the learning of the 3 R's too soon, learning how to actually play with each other, how to socialize, having an environment that was geared to the imagination, not early intellectualization, similar to Montessori, for example, which was very popular in the United States at that time. And I certainly studied Maria Montessori's system in order to be able to see what was similar and what was dissimilar in Waldorf, and what the difference in the objectives were. So I was very grateful to be familiar with Montessori, and I visited Montessori classrooms in order to see how they did things. And it was as if Maria Montessori, with her good heart, she was a doctor in Italy, with her good heart saw the poor children of the city and longed to empower them and give them an education whereby they could compete with people from better backgrounds. So she took the idea of the absorbent mind, which was exactly like Rudolf Steiner's 0 to 7 years old mindset of who the child is, what they're doing, that sort of thing. What was lacking in Maria Montessori, because she was very intellectual, was any spiritual idea of who the child was. For her, it was all about preparing them quickly and well for an intellectual jump ahead. For Rudolf Steiner education, it was to give a child some experience of a type of consciousness that they had in the far distant past, in another lifetime. And that really is how these 7-year periods that Rudolf Steiner talks about, really how they work, is it's as though they, each period, like 0 to 7, you know it's ending when you see the teeth change in the child. They begin to lose teeth and their second teeth come in. So you know that's a rite of passage. You'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to realize that. But what does it mean? And for him, it meant that They were moving out of the first phase of life, in which you get to experience a consciousness that was completely like paradise, innocent, playful, beautiful, all the truth, goodness, and beauty of the Greeks, that whole thing, but very unconscious, very unconscious. Then when the teeth change until adolescence, and we hit another rite of passage, another 7 years down the road, though now, of course, everything's coming much faster than 7 years, right? So in that 7-year period, the etheric forces that were busy building the physical body the first 7 years are released. And now they're available for learning, a certain kind of learning, certain organic kind of learning. So the etheric becomes the way the teacher approaches all the lessons. Now we get into the reading, writing, and arithmetic in a much more serious way from 7 to 14, but still through the arts, still with color and music and movement. They make their own main lesson books that are quite beautiful and parents keep forever. This is the time when they begin to enter into knowledge, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and not just to be used, as with Maria Montessori's. It's more that the knowledge that the child and the brain power that the child is developing is to be used to get ahead in this world. And I certainly don't fault her, because that was the problem that she set out to solve. But in the Steiner education, it's much more about learning to love knowledge as a lifetime pursuit, and really peering into all these subjects that most kids think are boring because they're in textbooks, and the teachers they have don't know how to teach, and there's no artistic anything going on in the classroom. So they begin to kind of despise knowledge, thinking it's sort of a game, and it's not. It has no deeper meaning to know about the earth and about the history of humanity and number and all these things. So that was the really thrilling part for me as a teacher, was I got to go back and relearn all this so that I could. That's part of what teacher training is, where you do study pedagogy, but you spend most of your time relearning mathematics, relearning science, relearning how to do storytelling, and bring a lesson out of a story that you've told. You learn eurythmy, which is a type of Steiner movement, and you learn music. You learn to play the recorder, so that you can teach the recorder. And so you're basically relearning what was probably taught badly. Though I had a 50s education, and in America, at least, I don't know how it was in Europe, but in America, it was still pretty good. It was still very liberal arts oriented. And we didn't have computers in the classroom. We didn't have some terrible canned music playing. No, we were drawing, we were moving, we were playing part of the time, and we would have lessons in which we drew pictures to go with the lessons. And so it was kind of Waldorf, but of course the teachers did not have that worldview, which really makes a huge difference to a child or a student in university. Whoever your teacher is, I've always said students, youths are just so tremendous at picking up on falsity and a fake teacher, someone who is very shallow, and they're just as good, at least some of them are, at picking up on a real student of life kind of teacher. And if you get one of those, I've had 3 out of how many teachers have I had in my big, long education through grad school and everything? Oh, I had only 3 great teachers in my life, but boy, I am so grateful for all 3, because you really see what an art teaching is. So I had just a wonderful opportunity in Waldorf to develop my my teaching to be much deeper. And I still meet here in town. I used to teach at the local high school here in Olympia, Washington. And the students, I still meet them now and then. I didn't teach it very long, by the way, because they didn't want someone like me. Imagine that. I would have thought they would have been thrilled to have a teacher like me, but no, they weren't. So I was in trouble all the time. So I finally stopped trying to do that. And I taught, by the way, I taught mostly taught language arts, and I taught history and political science as well. So anyway, I meet students on the street, or former students, and it's always, "You were our best teacher, Miss Freeland. Miss Freeland, you were the best." Of course I was, even though I'm sure I was not perfect by any means, but I was alive, and I loved knowledge, and I was able to share that with them. And some of them actually kept it and developed it further. So anyway, that, to me, Rudolf Steiner gave me that through the Waldorf teaching. I never was able to teach high school level in Waldorf. Each job that I went to interview for was never my my forte, whatever subject they wanted me to teach. Because by then, by high school, you are teaching subjects, you know, and science, math, whatever. So no, I never was able to do that. But I started the 4 schools, and in 16 years, I pretty much burned out. And there were reasons for that. It's always messy to start schools. You know, you're dealing with people who are from completely different lives, and maybe even different philosophies, who are certainly interested in Waldorf, but not that interested in Rudolf Steiner's ideas, really. And somehow people think that you can take one without the other. I don't think that's really possible, because it's a holistic educational format. And you really do need, it's not that you need to memorize Steiner and take a test or something, but if you're not studying the deeper ideas, I think it eventually goes dry. No matter how many pink kindergartens you have, no matter how many beautiful main lesson books you have, if you don't keep the mother tree, you will lose your way. And that's what's happening now. I know it's happening in Europe as well, because I have contacts in Europe, but it's really happening here in America. It's as if it's just a technique. It's just like, you know, you have a technique for gardening. So you have your technique, you do the raised beds, you do whatever it is you do, and you get good food. Well, unfortunately, a child is not a turnip. So you don't really, it doesn't really quite work that way. And in my opinion, this last 3 years, almost 3 years now, of the COVID and the lockdowns and masks and the fear and all of it, Now we have Waldorf schools that are completely towing the line and getting vaxxed and recommending boosters and doing in America anyway, doing race theory in faculty meetings and gender bashing in the sense of not using pronouns in a proper way, etc. All that. No one, to my knowledge, no Waldorf school has stood up to this here in America. Not at all.
In Germany, not either.
All right. Yeah. So then you have to look at that and think about it and what that means. You can say, okay, there's been infiltration, but if I look back, and I left the Waldorf movement pretty much in 1991 or right around there. One of the reasons I left was I got tired of arguing with some of the faculty who would not come to Steiner study groups during faculty meeting. We had a study, we would start out with a Steiner study, just very short, nothing long. And then we would maybe go to a child study of talking about a particular child from an anthroposophic and teacher point of view. But I got tired of being the bad guy because we would not be able to skip the Steiner study. And this became quite a problem, as I recall. And I just finally realized I'd had it. I'd really had it, because I'd started 4 schools, but I hadn't really had a chance to settle in anywhere. And it was a sort of Odysseus Telemachus problem. I was more like Odysseus in that, sailing the 7 seas and founding schools or whatever. And then there was the problem of running the school, which is much more of a Telemachus type of job. And admittedly, I probably didn't have the personality for doing that in a quiet way or whatever. Because for me, Waldorf and Anthroposophy were completely married. They were not separate. So anyway, I had already seen the beginnings of the end of the Waldorf school as per how it was presented in, for example, the book, the Stockmeyer, as it's, the Bible of the Waldorf teacher, the Stockmeyer, but also just the entire idea of, I hadn't thought of the vaccines, but I certainly had trouble with parents who would come and pay a big tuition, and then the child would be going home and watching TV and playing video games. And I, again and again, made home visits and told parents, you might as well take him out. I hate to say that, but you're wasting your tuition, because everything you're doing at home is undoing everything I'm doing in the classroom. And if you don't hear me, maybe you ought to find somewhere else. And that was hard, because we needed the tuition. They're not state-run schools here. And you have to come up with the money to keep running them. You do a lot of fundraising and a high tuition, and then you try to have a couple of scholarships for the parents who are a little more needy. But it's difficult to be able to say to, I don't know, like 5 out of 20 students, to the parents, what are you doing? We had an agreement, because I always did an interview before I accepted a child. I had a long waiting list for my classes. And I'd say, if you do TV and computers and video at home, I really don't want to take the child, because, it'll be too much you can't serve two masters at one time, I would say.
Mhm.
So now it looks to me like Waldorf schools are not serving two masters at one time. They've just abandoned the master and taken up something else.
Mhm.
So, I still feel that at least maybe the first 3 years, possibly, where there's no computers in the kindergartens and the first 3 grades, maybe it still can be done. But if vaccinations are being recommended, well, I don't see any reason to go. I
Mhm.
really don't.
Yeah. So some people, when they talk about Steiner, to some people he is this light figure, almost like a prophet, and to others he's the mad occultist. And how would you characterize him?
Well, he's well known in very high occult circles,
Mm.
and I am familiar with some of those, as the Christian initiate of the 20th century. Case closed. That's who he was. And you saw that drama unfold when he was still head of the Berlin section of Theosophy. And Annie Besant and Charles Ledbetter were running Theosophy then. That was post Madame Blavatsky. That was early 20th century, 1900s. And Steiner, when they said that Krishnamurti was the second coming of Christ, Steiner was done. And he left the Theosophists, and about 60 of his 60 Theosophists went with him, and they formed Anthroposophy. So he had a Christ experience, actually amazingly similar to the one I had when I was 25 in a college classroom. I had an experience of what is known as the etheric Christ. So he, because of the taking a different road than Theosophists, there were a lot of occultists who were disappointed in him. And then there were others who understood what Christ was, because Christ is not the same thing as Jesus. And Steiner explains all that in some of his lectures and books. So the idea that you could have an occult movement based not just on science, and that is what it is known as spiritual science. It's not just an empty term, but you could also have an occult movement based on Christ and who Christ really was. And that was, to me, because of that one thing. It's one thing to say that you're going to merge science and spirit, and everybody's kind of okay with that because, it's going to look different and that's okay. But to then claim for Christianity, the true Christianity, and I don't mean churchianity, that's what I call it, churchianity, that's what we have today. And I tried to, after my experience of the etheric Christ, I tried for 5 years to go to churches because I had read in the New Testament that you have to have fellowship with a fellow Christians. And I was, of course, I didn't know any Christians I didn't know much about occultism either at that time. And I tried, I went to churches, but I always felt like it was coffee hour and a lot of gossip. And then the men were telling the women what to do all the time.
Yeah.
So I didn't see anything spiritual going on there. I didn't see any reason for me to be there. For a while, I was quite taken with the Eucharist because something would happen in me during it. And I thought, oh yeah, this has something to do with what I experienced in my college classroom that day. This holiness, this idea of maybe a cosmic Christ, you could say, a Christ that doesn't belong to the church or any church, but is actually a cosmic being that some people are fortunate enough, who knows why, I certainly wasn't more deserving than anyone else, to experience and have it begin to rebuild and reshape your whole soul life through what is called in the Bible the Holy Spirit. So Rudolf Steiner I didn't know that when I went for Waldorf teacher training. I didn't know at all that he was involved with Christ or true Christianity. I just wanted to learn about teaching. That's all I knew. But by the time I left the Waldorf movement, because I had burned out, I knew who he was, that he was the initiate, Christian initiate of the 20th century. And therefore, I wanted to learn more because for me by then, and that would have been when I left the Waldorf movement, that was 20 years after my experience of Christ. And I had given up on churches. I didn't go to churches, but for me, I had decided that every day was Sunday and everywhere was church. And that I just had to stay awake to the person in front of me to be able to see what I should do with that person, if anything. And that was pretty much my theology. And it worked very well. And I didn't know even that Steiner had said that there is only one path of initiation that really works now, and that is the path of everydayness, of real life. That it is a path of initiation, not a matter of becoming a Buddhist or becoming a Hindu or joining some Christian sect or a Catholic, Opus Dei, or no, none of those work anymore. The only path of initiation, and initiation I need to describe for people who don't even know that term, that's where 1 minute you're like this, and then you go through some sort of inner experience, and now you're different. That is an initiation. And it can be very involved, like Native American initiations, rites of passage. It can happen other ways. But basically, Rudolf Steiner was very clear that it is now life itself that is the path and the only path of true initiation. So I was doing it without knowing that it was the only real path. I had tried to go and do something else, but I still encounter people who say exactly kind of like what you said, that, oh, he's an occultist. That's evil. That's bad.
Yeah.
And they have somehow been conditioned or programmed to think of the word occult as being something more than hidden, which is what it means.
Yeah.
It means hidden. And, it's oc, which is hidden, and cult. So, okay, hidden cult, that could be bad, right? We all know that. We know there are cults that are bad and they are hidden. And they present themselves as this, and they're really that, right? Like, I think right away of Scientology. That is a modern cult that presents itself as helping you to empower yourself and blah, blah, blah. And boom, you're in a prison. You're
Mm.
in like an occult prison. Might as
Mhm.
well call it that. So I don't generally say anything. It's normally Christians who will be very heavy about Rudolf Steiner being an occultist. They, of course, have read nothing he's written,
Mm.
which always makes me laugh sort of darkly, I guess. Of, you know, you make this huge decision about someone who gave 6,000 lectures in his life and wrote, I can't remember how many books, 300 and some books. And yet, no, he's bad. He's bad. So for me, I am very, it's not that I run around trying to convert people to Rudolf
No.
Steiner or
Mm-mm.
Christ. No, I don't do that because I leave people free to make their own decisions, similar to those, yes, like the ones who unfortunately chose to be inoculated.
Mm.
Uh, you have to leave people free, but meanwhile, if you can just study a little bit, and that's very hard, you know, Judith, for people to do now. Most people don't know how to read anymore, even because the education has been so appallingly bad. And not just because they didn't know any better, they are trying to dumb down the entire Western civilization. And so they've had a great success in that. If I can go by the people I meet who can't think their way out of a paper bag, as we say in America, and I I just try now to set an example of someone who is pretty highly educated and self-educated. I have a master's degree, but primarily my real education was not the paper trail that I went down to get these pieces of paper, but the self-education of all the books I've read and all that. I mean, you know, I have always known that knowledge could really help me serve humanity. And so I've always known that since I was a
Mm.
child. And being an only child, I therefore read a lot because I was a very interior type of child, an introvert, as they say, and had tremendous imagination and tremendous memory. And so I feel all that had to do with my destiny, and that meeting Rudolf Steiner had to do with my destiny of a real teacher who could show me how to truly think. Because I have a very good intellect, very good, you know, I've had, when I was a child, it was all one IQ test after another. And I, but it was always, I was sort of limited. I had this intellect where I could do intellectual things pretty easily, not mathematics though. And then I had to learn that I wasn't able to go very deep. I could memorize, I could understand what teachers were saying, professors, etc. But and I could read. I could read very well and retain a lot. But I couldn't really go deep into what all these ideas are really getting at in the human experience. And it was Steiner who taught me that there are three kinds, we have three types of souls in us. I mean, it's all our soul, but there are three different functionalities. The first is the sentient soul, which is something we experience as a child and a youth, where we're very feeling the world, we're tasting the world, we're seeing, we're hearing. It's very exciting. And, you know, we even know certain nationalities. I right away think of the Italians who retain a certain sentient soul above all else, which is often very wonderful. Then there's the next soul, which is the intellectual soul. That's where you can understand concepts and you can connect concepts. and knowledge becomes very important to you. Like a collection, like a book collector, you collect knowledge and you have a lot of knowledge. But then there's this third soul that only started in the 1500s, says Rudolf Steiner, and that is the consciousness soul. And that soul does the deep diving into the meaning of something and what it means and what its purpose is. And that type of thinking is very rare in the West. I can't speak for the East because I haven't lived in the East, but I can speak to the West. I've lived in Europe and I've lived here, or I've lived in England and I've lived here. So the ability, and right away I assumed anthroposophists, the Steiner people, would know how to do that. Of course they would. They study Rudolf Steiner. Of course you're going to know how to do that. Not so. Not so at all. Instead, it's as though the consciousness soul period only comes in little blips every now and then when you might fall into a hole, maybe of depression or a thinking over a divorce or a child being in trouble or something, and you kind of fall into a hole, and then you see something and you understand it, and then hopefully you crawl out of the hole and you've got some new tools, you've got a new way of doing things. That's the consciousness soul. The intellectual soul can't do that, just comparing one idea with another, or one psychological theory with another, or one physiological thing with another. No, the consciousness soul really sifts through a lot of detail and comes up with something really transforming. And it's just amazing how few people do it. I'm not saying I do it all the time, but I would say that it is my number one functionality of the soul, much more than sentient soul, much more than just intellectual soul. No, I'm very much involved in the consciousness soul development. And Steiner did say that that not only is life itself the only initiatic path now to follow, but that the human being is the religion of the gods. That's what he said. All right, so let's not talk about whether it's monotheistic or if it's polytheistic. Let's skip that. But the idea that the human being is so precious to the divine, well, what's that about? Because we certainly know we've seen more than our share of the lowest of the lowest of the lowest, greedy Western corporate behaviors in the last 3 years, willing to kill millions. So what's so great about being a human being? Well, it's the human beings who are really attempting to become real human beings. See, just because we have a head and 2 arms and 2 legs doesn't mean we're human yet. Yes, we have these fantastic bodies, these human bodies. And I've taken very good care of mine because I learned very early that I didn't want to be a broken down old lady. So I've really taken good care of myself. So if you are on the path to becoming truly human, now that would be the truly human are the greats that I think of. The great human beings. I spent a period when I was younger of reading nothing but autobiographies and biographies of great individuals. I just couldn't read enough. I was studying, how did they live? How did they decide to live? And And then, do you think they used that? And then they had all these hard things, like Malcolm X's autobiography. He had all these hard things that happened to him, and he had the race thing hanging on him in America at that time was terrible. And you know, how did he do that? I mean, it was a burning question for me with all these autobiographies and biographies I read, because you know, I didn't know about karma then. I didn't even know about karma. But God knows I must have had some very heavy karma coming into this life, because I had a very difficult childhood and youth. And I really had to do this. I had to search. A lot of people think that, oh, well, you know, I just have to accept this because nobody's coming forward to tell me what to do. And I don't see any way out of this, and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, it's one thing I know about life is every good thing you find here, you have to find it. You have to search for it. It's not going to drop in your plate. And that, I got that from Steiner as well, though he always couched everything in very sort of intellectual language with very careful diction regarding how it is to work here on the earth. You know, you have to search there too. There's nowhere you just get it handed to you. Not that I know of.
So speaking of Malcolm X, I'm going to read something that Rudolf Steiner wrote in 1906, and it is from the Occult Significance of Blood. And here's what he said, and that really gave me pause. To what extent are uncivilized peoples capable of becoming civilized? How can a Negro or an utterly barbaric savage become civilized? And in what way ought we to deal with them? And I have to say, you know, he kind of reminds me with that statement, he reminds me of Yuval Harari, you know, who recently was telling everybody, yeah, what are we going to do with all the useless people? Yeah, once we have merged with the machine and we are moving on, and then the others, they can no longer compete, and what we don't need all these people. So I don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to tear him apart here, but he said that, okay, you could argue 1906, but still he always thought of himself as a very developed soul. So what's up with that? That he had such a derogatory opinion about Black people?
Well, there's another part that you obviously don't know about, and I wish I could give you chapter and verse on where it is, but there's another part where he talks about the Blacks in America, particularly. I don't know if he used the word Negro or African or what it was, but he makes it very clear that it is the Blacks in America who will save America because of all they've been through and all their suffering and their genuine big hearts that they seem to have, far outweighing their European constituents that they have, that, you know, have owned the slavery business and who have all the money, and you know, the so-called whites, and it, you know, everything. He was very clear that much that America had become was due to two things. One, what we had inherited from the Europeans, which is good and bad, and the geography of America. which is exceedingly magnetic and very harmonic, very hard to balance. And so just as everything with Steiner, if you read a little something, I don't know the context in which that was said. I don't know much of anything, except I have heard this over and over and over. And he was no racist, but what he saw was that each race and each nation has a different task to do and brings it to the table of humanity. And for the Blacks, certainly in America, I mean, I still remember the day I got home from living 3 years in England, where I had known quite a few Blacks in London. Very different, most of them Caribbean, I might add. Very comfortable, having, not at all the race card, as I call it, that America has, which I had experienced as a child too. I got home, I'm at the airport in New York before I catch another flight. And the attitude of the Black workers at the food restaurants where you're getting to go. I knew immediately I was back home, because the anger, the rage, the disgust was all just front and center. And boy, I had not missed it when I lived in London. Because in London, if you need to know that it's not a skin color thing that's going on here, I mean, black, yellow, whatever, in London was, it was just not, it was not the same. Somehow that race card has been played over and over and over again in America in such a gruesome way. But I would say regarding Steiner, you have to read some other stuff, because he makes it very clear that that Blacks are what will save us here in America because of who they are. And I'm sorry, I don't remember where it is.
Yeah, then if I really want to, I will find it. I'm pretty sure. Yet there are some statements, that I find hard to reconcile with what you just told me. For instance, okay, we have his idea of the root races, yeah, and it was not really his idea. Blavatsky taught it before him, and it goes even further back.
It goes way back, yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so he said about the Aborigines in Australia that they are a subsection of a root race that is now devolving into an ape. And that I found really disgusting, because I have several problems with that. First of all, I do not believe that our ancestors are apes. Yeah,
right.
I don't believe that. Hence, I do not believe that you can devolve into an ape.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, it does sound really repulsive. As far as the thing I know about the ape, I'll put that forward, because I don't know at all this statement you just said he said about the Aborigines, I assume, in Australia.
Aborigines, yeah.
Is that the ape was unable, this is Steiner, I believe I'm right in saying this is Steiner, the ape was unable to evolve to the human level and quickly began to devolve. And first of all, you can devolve. There's no question in my mind about that.
Yeah, okay, then I'm on board, of course. And
Yeah,
I see that where I am living as well. There
yeah,
are people who are basically operating on instincts.
yeah. And maybe it's not physical, where
Mm,
their physiognomy is changing. But in the case of the ape, I remember this fantastic experience I had in San Diego, which is on the coast in west coast of America. I went to the zoo, which at that time was considered a very great zoo, and I was alone. And I went to the ape's cage, and there was a male ape in the cage, and he was having a very bad day, and
yeah,
he was furious, and he was leaping up on the cage and shaking it and crying out. I mean, I just began to weep.
yeah.
I mean,
I,
I
I,
just,
I
I could
totally
feel,
understand what you mean.
yeah,
Mhm.
I felt everything he felt. And there was nothing I could do for him. And all I did was I just stood there. There weren't people around. And I just talked to him from my mind that I was so sorry
Yeah,
that he was in a cage. And, you know, it was just, and that's when I really felt the kinship, because on the soul level, I would imagine on the sentient soul level, he and I have something in common. And I really, that I've never forgotten that moment when I realized that, oh, this is the evolution, that he didn't make the jump to the human level.
mhm.
He was not able to, whether it was because he was in a forest or on the tundra, or it was, I have no idea. That was
Mhm.
so long ago, so many thousands of years ago, if not millions. And yet there's a resonance in my soul for him. And eventually, through my doing that, he did calm down and start staring at me. I mean, he definitely was somewhat psychic. But yeah, regarding this statement and that by 19th century people, I have no idea. I mean, we've come a long way in our conceptual life as well. And I don't think, if Steiner was the Christian initiate, it doesn't mean he was Christ. It means he was who he was, evolving in the way he was evolving, because he's certainly not perfect.
No, 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 no. I do not have, but Ilana, and that is just me. That is how I'm wired. When I see something, especially when he talks about the root races, the sub races, and there is a very, very hierarchical structure in it. And that
Very
to
hierarchical.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that to me, it just doesn't sit well with me. And the moment you actually come to the conclusion, this is a lesser being and this is a more evolved being, because that is the conclusion that comes then afterwards, that opens the floodgates for all kinds of atrocities. Once you have convinced people, um, uh, this group of people, they are like worms or insects, or they are, yeah, they are parasites or whatever, that there is no telling what will come out of it.
Right. But think of this. Here's the other part of that story, is he
Mhm.
was the first occultist, to my knowledge, which is why he came under such opprobrium from other occultists. He was the very first who said, we have to tell more than we've been telling people. We
Mhm.
can't keep things from people forever, because occultists, they had sat on all kinds of truths that would be helpful to us if we knew. And he was the first one who started bringing them all out. And he, they tried to kill him several times because of that. That's how, because a lot of those occultists felt as you do, which is, don't tell them about that. Don't tell them, because it will be abused. And that's exactly.
That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying don't tell them, it will be abused. I find it shocking to think it. That
you're saying don't tell them at all.
You actually think you are more evolved than another human being.
Well, if you think there were no root races, I don't know how you can possibly imagine that.
Yeah, so that was my other question. Do we have really proof of the root races?
What would you call proof?
Yeah, all I can find is this concept, and then it goes back to Hermes Trismegistus and so on and so on. So, and that entity, I'm really not a fan of his. And so all I can find is that concept of root races, but
I'm more interested now in why you're concentrating on these very esoteric, ancient stumbling blocks. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you getting other things out of it?
Because it really puzzles me when I see hierarchy in such a way. I have a hard time getting over it. I have to.
But there's nothing but hierarchy here.
Yes, I know that. I know that.
But... Yeah, and that's why you're right that we need to question it. But regarding root races and that, which goes all the way back to the Vedas, you can find the same stuff in the Vedas, which are what, 30,000 years old or something. We are not the same creature that lived during that time, for sure. We have evolved in some ways, and maybe we have even devolved in some ways. I really don't know, but I know that in order to get this this frontal brain that we have, we had to give up a certain intuitive faculty that would have, I feel, probably understood this root race thing far better than we can with our frontal brain. I think that the consciousness of those days is very different. And I don't know why Rudolf Steiner would have brought it forward and said things like what you've brought today. I don't really know. But I know that if I had the choice between not knowing that there was at one time such a thing as root races, very hierarchic, and then somebody making some decision that I was not to know that because it might produce like Nazis and things. I would want the former. I would want to know so that I can make my own decision if I do my own research as to why this concept is there. Because Rudolf Steiner has been really pummeled to death regarding race. I've run into this all the years that I've been involved with Steiner. And to me, the main thing, and I'm not trying to get him off the hook for some of his biases that he might have had from the 19th century and, and all that, is that he was trying to open a door to a great many things that had been shut for forever. Common people were not allowed to know all these things, many of the things that he has allowed us to know. So I assume it came from the past, and he he may have said it in some sort of context that we no longer have. But I know one thing: he was a very high being and a very good-hearted, but very much taking his role very seriously too. So that's about all I can say.
So let's say there were root races. Who hosted the seeding?
Well, you mean, is it off planet or not? Oh, I have no idea.
Or what is it exactly?
Well, if you
Where
read
did these races come from?
you can read Cosmic Memory and find out that. I don't remember. It's a very short book. It's a kind of a fun book because it's sort of like science fiction. It goes back to when the earth was still very malleable, was not hardened like it is now. And the air was more like water than it is now. And the human being was still, there were not two sexes. We were one androgyne, and all sorts of things began then. And I think the root races are probably in there as to why they would definitely come from the archetypes, like in a Jungian sense. And the archetypes would come from, I don't know if archons were involved in this. Maybe John Lash would know. But I know that the archive were. And the archive are the spirits of form, and they give form. And why one root race would be higher than another root race, I really don't know. It's not something I've really studied that much, truthfully.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that is a subject for me to
Yeah,
take
maybe it's for
dive
you
in.
to do. Yeah, but at least start with Cosmic Memory, because in Cosmic Memory is that great scene in which the women are in the cave. I remember this very well. The women and the children are in the cave and they're tending the fire and making the food or whatever. And the men are off hunting and they're way the heck away, miles away, or I don't know how far. But the air is, Steiner describes it, the air is viscous. So it's like almost like you're breathing water, right? And the women go out when it's time for the men to come back. The women go out and they sing, and the song floats on this watery, viscous air way far away. And the men are out there looking for meat or whatever they do. And suddenly they hear this song and they think, home. And they turn around and they go back home. And to me, that clarified so much about why men are like they are for me. I know this is so crazy. But the will element in men is so much more powerful than in women. And in women, the will element, maybe that's a wrong way to say it, the will element is very different in women, where they are the keepers of culture, they are the keepers of the family unit, the keepers of whatever, and they have a very powerful will in that. The men are, they're not even thinking. They didn't have any thinking back then, and they can still be that way, right? They can still like end up in sexual peccadillos just out of their will without thinking things through or anything. And that really helped me understand them. That little scene. And I love that scene because I can completely envision that they would not have even come home had the concept not been given to them by the women. Yeah, anyway, it's a great book, Cosmic Memory.
Yeah, okay, I will certainly give it a try.
You start there anyway.
Yeah. So Elana, I thank you very much for coming. I found it very interesting. And yeah, let's hope we stay in contact and that I will have the electricity to do it.
Yeah, right. Well, you know where I am.
Okay, so yeah, that was it, guys. Night flight for today. And we see you all next time. Stay safe and sound. Bye bye.